Previously on DIY builds. This project starts out like no other, where I'm taking an existing project and I'm going to be modifying it to build this new Lego table. Previously it was my kid's train table, and you see it's a little bit larger than the Lego base plates I have laid out on top. So I trace around, and I need to start breaking this down into its smaller pieces so I can bring them over to the table saw and the miter saw and chop them down to their new sizes. If you're going to be building this from scratch, I have a free set of plans on my website that uses the Lego table dimensions, as well as still the old plans from the train table dimensions. Once everything is broken down into a smaller size, I can give it a light sanding to get rid of all of that sticky residue that kids put on everything over the years. And then at the table saw, chop everything to size, as well as using my homemade track guide on the bigger pieces. Now for the legs, this could have easily just been a rectangle. You could put any design you want inside of these legs at all. The only thing that matters is the height and the width. So you see I have to chop off a bit of the width of the leg. It's a little bit more than I would have wanted, but that's what you get for using old materials. Next, the aprons can get chopped down to size on the miter saw, and then everything receives a new roundover, as I had to put a roundover on the side of the leg, so I thought I would just redo this roundover and give everything a fresh coat of spackle and paint afterwards. After that, the top needs some new pocket holes drilled, as two of the sides were shortened, as well as the end pieces over at my homemade pocket hole machine will receive 2 pocket holes on each end. Assembly starts off pretty easy by attaching the cross members underneath using the existing pocket holes. As you'll see later, this doesn't really work out too well, as it gets a little too close to the side for me to be able to access the pocket screws that go into the end of the leg support. This isn't really that much of a setback, as it just requires undoing a few pocket screws and moving the support a few inches away. With that, the Lego table itself is now complete. Being a smaller version of its former self from a train table, it's now time to move on to building the 2 big sliding drawers that go underneath for the Lego storage. So first, over at the table saw and miter saw, I'm going to break everything down to its final width and length. And this is a great project to use a bunch of scrap 3/4 inch plywood on, as it's going to get painted and all the voids are going to get filled in with putty anyways. So it really doesn't matter what joinery method you use or what kind of 3/4 inch plywood you use for this. You could use MDF or particle board if you really wanted to. Over at my homemade pocket hole machine, I can drill out all the pocket holes for the base to attach to the sides later. Next, at the table saw, I cut up a bunch of squares. These are going to be used for a thickness offset for the bracket that's going to hold the pins in the wheels later. Then I can use a spacer, so I make sure I place these in the exact same spot all 8 times that I need to do this. It just gets held in place with some glue and 4 brad nails. These spacers, as it turned out, worked out great for aligning the base of the drawer. It took all the guesswork out. Everything was simply laid on top and screwed in place. This, of course, was repeated 3 more times. Next, before attaching the 2 end pieces, I lay out an arc-shaped piece on top with equal distance spacing at the ends, and trace it out onto the piece and cut it on the bandsaw. This is going to act as the drawer pull. It could be any shape you want, so if you download the plans, it just shows a rectangle. Go ahead and put whatever shape you want. Could be a trapezoid, rectangle, what have you. The benefit of using this scrap piece left over from my record stand build is that I had a piece of sandpaper attached to it, so I could use that as a sanding block to smooth out this arc. Then over at the router table, using a 1/4 inch roundover bit, I smooth over all the edges before this is assembled, as it would be impossible to get in there after the fact. Now on to assembling the 2 ends. I simply lay down a bead of glue on the plywood, line everything up with some 1 1/4 brad nails, and then drive in 6 2-inch screws countersunk the head below the surface, as everything will get putty to hide these screw holes. Last is screwing in the pocket holes in both ends. Then it's on to building the brackets that will hold the wheels. Again, another great time to use up your scrap 3/4 inch plywood. Once the material is cut to width, over at my chop saw I have a stop block set up to cut all of these 8 pieces to the exact same length, and then a fence and stop block is set up on my drill press table to repeat the same hole 8 times. These 8 pieces receive 1 pocket hole. 4 of them are on one side, 4 of them are on the other. Before attaching these brackets, I place some glue along the edge and the face and tack everything in place with some 1 1/4 brad nails. Then I come back and use the pocket screw to firmly attach the one end. Before driving the pocket screw in, I insert a piece of scrap wood there so the pocket screw doesn't suck itself in and pinch down on the future wheel to go there. Now I can flush up all the ends with some light sanding, and then over at the router table, continue that 1/4 inch roundover that I put on the end pieces before. This makes it a lot easier and cleaner as opposed to doing everything by hand. As you see, I'll have to do the inside bit by hand, but at least I got the rest of that done with the router table, reducing the amount of dust flying all over the shop. Because the router bit can't get all the way into the corners with the round over, I come back with a $3 chisel that's been slightly dulled and covered in glue, chop off some high spots, and then use some sandpaper to get the rest of the round over in shape. Off camera, I applied 3 coats of drywall compound and then sanded it all off, blowing it into my neighbor's yard. The next step is to cut out the 8 wheels. I chose to use my homemade CNC for this as it's easy and quick, but if you don't have a CNC machine, you can easily use the right size hole saw. This will even give you a hole in the middle, or you can cut them out freehand with a jigsaw, bandsaw, and just make sure you center that hole in the middle. Now you might be wondering why I'm doing this with the plywood wheels and not just buying some casters. And the idea here is to 1, save money, because all this requires is scrap plywood and some shoulder bolts, and 2, I don't want these to move very well. I want them to only slightly roll, as when the kids are building Legos, you don't really want the drawers moving around on you all the time. So in order to drill the hole that the shoulder bolts will screw into, I put the shoulder bolt in, smack it with the hammer to mark the location, and using a drill bit with a depth stop, I go ahead and drill out this hole, and then drive in the shoulder bolt. This will cut its own threads and be perfectly secure for the rest of its life. And with all 8 wheels now installed, it's on to final sanding, prep, and paint. Now I went ahead and sprayed on this primer coat, and what I didn't realize was I was kind of spraying it everywhere, so my shop is now white speckled. After the primer is dried for about a day, it's very important to give it a light sanding as this gives the paint so much of a nicer finish. The yellow needed 2 coats, and the red didn't really, but there were some few areas to touch up. The red paint was Bear brand from Home Depot, and the yellow was CIL from, I don't know, Canadian Tire or something. And I will tell you, that Bear paint is worlds apart from that CIL paint. Always go with the better product when you're painting. It saves so much grief. During painting, just in case, I had removed all 8 of the wheels in the 2 drawers. Now it's just time to reassemble these into place and make sure they're running smooth. If they're not totally free, just loosen up the bolt, and if that doesn't work, you can always sand a little bit off the plywood, or maybe install some paste wax.
You guys want to go for a ride?
Yeah.
Oh.
Only dads grunt like that when they stand up.
Or sit down.
Oh. Sit down. Oh. Is that fine?
Yeah.
Woo! Do you want to go for a ride? Oh, big boy. Sit down. Oh! Is that good?
Mm-hmm.
So I did a little experiment here to see what would be the strongest for attaching the Lego base plates to the painted wooden surface. So over here I've got wood glue, spray adhesive, contact cement, and some CA glue, otherwise known as super glue or crazy glue. So let's go ahead and try removing the wood glue first. Okay, that was pretty weak and it doesn't really look like it fully dried. The spray adhesive, that was pretty weak as well. Contact cement. Yeah, that was pretty tricky to get off, but still able to come up. Maybe it wouldn't work itself up as it's pretty tacky, but all right, let's see how the super glue does. Yeah, that's the winner. That's the one.
Go.
Now with the help of the special lady in your life, you can squeeze out 8 million tubes of cheap dollar store super glue, as you want to save that extra $2 and make it as inconvenient as possible, and lay down all the Lego base plates on top. Note, it's important to use Lego pieces between the base plates when installing them for proper spacing. And with that, the project is complete. The very last thing to do is empty out all of my scrap Legos, which I had separated into colors because I was an OCD child, and giving them to the kids to enjoy for themselves.
It's big for the bridge.
Yeah? What about dinosaur? Oh, he's eating the bridge.
Oh, he needs a body.
What about Theo's dinosaur? Can he eat the bridge?
No, he won't like it.
Oh.
He's saying, but. That's what he's saying right now.
Oh, that.
Because I heard him saying that.
Theo, who gave this to you?
Dada.
Why did Dad give that to you?
Because he thought it would make us happy. It made us happy, actually, Dada.